By and large, the hardware we've discussed so far is actually fairly easy to set up on Unix and Linux, with a couple of exceptions. We've talked about printers. Sound cards are one of the other devices that can be tricky sometimes to install on Linux or Unix. Now, if you're using a Unix or Linux box as a server, you may not need a sound card installed at all. Normally, you want to keep the amount of hardware and services running on a server type of box to a minimum. But if you're using the sound card capability on a desktop, then of course you want to get it in there. Now, installing sound cards can require a little bit of knowledge of the driver and the configuration information for the sound card. It really depends on how old the sound card is and whether it's supported by Linux drivers or not. Again, a lot of modern sound devices, which are usually built into the motherboard these days, are normally automatically supported for Windows, but Unix and Linux not so much. Now, in BSD, it's actually not that difficult to configure. We simply can add the driver name to /etc/rc.conf, and there has to be a device file in /dev for it. Now, in OpenSUSE, a version of Linux out there, we can configure this in YAST, and we'll take a look at both methods of configuring sound cards in Unix and Linux. Okay, we're looking back at our OpenSUSE 11 box, and if we go to YAST and take a look at the hardware options again, we'll see where it has an entry for sound cards. And if we click down there, we're going to be able to see what's installed, and if there is no sound card installed, as there wasn't on this particular box, it can actually attempt to detect the presence of some older sound cards. And you should probably know that probing for these sound cards could take a little bit of time, and it could make the system unstable, meaning it could lock the system up and you'd have to reboot. So we can go ahead and tell it to probe anyway, and it's going to look for these cards. Usually with Linux, especially most modern versions of Linux, it will detect sound cards automatically. You usually don't have a problem with that, especially if it's a built-in sound card into the motherboard. You may not have a problem with it. If you cannot detect a sound card, as we didn't here, then probably what you're going to need to do is go to the manufacturer's website and see if there are Linux drivers for it and download those. And that's the way we used to do things in old Windows, because not everything had a driver that was supported. Nowadays, with most modern hardware devices, though, it's generally supported by Windows out of the box at least, and we're seeing that it's more and more supported by Linux as we go. Unix, on the other hand, is a different story. Let's go ahead and take a look at Unix and how in FreeBSD and see how we might install a sound driver there. We're back at our FreeBSD 8 box, and what we want to do first is see if a sound card was detected. And there's a couple of commands we can run to do this. We can look at lspci and do a grep on that, because there's going to be a lot of information in lspci when we run it. And do a grep-i and look for audio. We may not see anything, and we didn't. And that's simply because there's no audio sound card detected. We could do the same thing if we like with dmessage and see if there's anything in there in the startup, and there's not. So what we might have to do in that case is go ahead and add 2 lines to our rc.conf file. These 2 lines actually really depend upon what sound card driver you've discovered that you need to add here. Let's do a cat on etc/rc.conf, and I've already added the lines in here. I have not rebooted the system yet. What you might find if you look through here at the 2 bottom lines, sound_load equals yes. That line has to be in there. And then the line below it would have to be the specific driver for the sound card you're trying to load. Now, that might not exactly read snd_driver_load. It might be snd_something else. It really depends upon the driver that you're trying to load. Running this line will load every driver that BSD has, though. And then you can go into /dev and see which drivers it actually did load, and then configure it from that point on. So you have to have these 2 lines in etc/rc.conf at least for the sound card driver to load. Better if you have the specific one. Now, if you know what sound card you have, then you could probably do a search on the internet and find the specific sound card driver details for the sound card for BSD Unix or for whatever Unix you're using. And this again is done a little bit differently depending upon which distribution of Linux and which version or flavor of Unix you're using as well. So there's just a couple of things you can do to try to get sound cards to run on your system. We looked at YAST and we looked at editing the rc.conf file.